So I wanted to post this video because I'm having a lot of thoughts today as an educator about our school system, but specifically, urban school systems, urban school districts, low socioeconomic schools and districts, and the people that work within them, the teachers that work within them, the staff that work within them. And I just have a lot of strong feelings. About particularly white educators in these communities and the lack of knowledge and the lack of studying and the lack of cultural awareness that they are required to have before going into communities makes it feel a lot like the Carlisle boarding school experiment, and if you don't know what that is, because a lot of people don't, because in this country we are taught the history that is convenient for those in power, not history that is true. The Carlisle boarding experiment took Native children away from their families, literally kidnapped in the middle of the night from indigenous families and tribes, and were taken hundreds of miles away to a boarding school and were kept out of the sun to lighten the color of their skin. Their hair was cut. They were punished if they were speaking in their indigenous language. They were taught English. They had to let go of all of their religious views and convert to Christianity. And this was an experiment that was done by the United States. It was supported by the United States government, and it's not talked about. And why? Why doesn't every teacher in classrooms across this country know that happened? Yes, we talk about slavery, the Holocaust, barely. That's also being written out of textbooks and history. Indigenous history is being written out. We've already known this though, but why aren't things, especially if you go into education as a teacher? So maybe to ask for this is too much for general classroom knowledge, but if you're going into teaching as a profession, especially if you're a white person, I think it's important to know all the atrocities committed towards people of color by white people in the educational system. Why don't we start there? Right now I'm in the process of finishing up my certification requirements for Texas. So I was one exam away from being fully certified in Texas, and then we moved to New York. And I didn't know that we would be coming back. I didn't, and the timing of the test was, I was moving 1 week and the test was going to be given 2 weeks later. In hindsight, I should have probably just flown back and took it just to have it in my pocket. But, hindsight is 2020. But I, as a Latina wanting to go back to Texas as a bilingual teacher, have had to take double the exams to teach as a bilingual teacher. So, and not only double the exams, right? So if you want to be a school teacher in Texas, general education, it's two tests that you take: a content area exam and then the PPR. I had to take 4 tests. So the content area exam, the PPR, a bilingual supplemental, and then the bilingual target proficiency test, which if you are a bilingual teacher in Texas, if you're trying to become a bilingual teacher in Texas, you know how hard that test is. I took it 4 times before I passed it, and this is me, an English language learner. Spanish was my first language, and even though I lost my language due to racism in this country, and that's a whole nother story to tell, but I stopped speaking Spanish because I felt the enormous pressure at a young age to let go of my native tongue and conform to speaking English. Even then though, I was around Spanish. My mother and father spoke Spanish. When I would go back to Puerto Rico, all my family spoke Spanish. So as a person that was a Spanish speaker first and was raised culturally, it was a hard test to pass. And while I believe it's important to really, especially with Spanish, to really understand that someone knows the language and is proficient, it feels in the African American communities or in Black communities, what they call the Black tax, it feels very much that way for me as a Latina, like, why am I having to work and jump through hoops that are 10 times more difficult just because I want to service and be of service to people of my community, just because I want to help other bilingual children not ever have to experience the racism and the hatred that I experienced growing up in the school system. So yeah, I'm having a lot of feelings today, and I wanted to jump on and kind of do a vlog about it because it's not a conversation that I see happening. And, we, at the school I am now, in New York, what I can say about New York, different than Texas, is that there is a movement in New York to really address the issues and the inadequacies in urban schools. And when I say inadequacies, I don't mean necessarily educational inadequacies, but about the conversations having to do with racism, having to do with politics, having to do with economics, and the impact of slavery or the impact of racism or prejudices throughout the years, and how that has affected marginalized communities. In New York, in all the schools that I've worked at, we've had professional development about racism and prejudices and about checking our own biases. And it's a good start, but it's also hard when I look to my left and right and I'm seeing educators kind of like rolling their eyes and zoning out all educators, people of color and white people, like not giving a shit. And it's hard because you cannot force anybody to care about something that that is so important. But in the institutions that I've been, they've at least tried to have missions and visions of anti-racism, of inclusion, not only diversity. I've also experienced here in New York, which I'm kind of eager to go back, to Texas to see, is where they are at in this, restorative justice movement. The restorative justice movement is not a new one, and we know that it's directly connected to the school to prison pipeline, and that is how you combat the school to prison pipeline. But I can say, being a teacher in New York, there are many things being done to try to really move away from punitive justice and discipline and move towards restorative justice. And it's, Lord knows, if you work in a school that is on this platform, it's not easy as a teacher, especially when, I'm an old millennial, right? I'm in my 30s, and I was raised in that punitive school system. And even though I know all of the psychology and the rationale to not operate in that way, when that is what and that's what you feel like you survived, like sometimes that's what you go to first. And I would love to myself really become more versed and confident and be able to really understand my own biases and my own trauma, to be able to implement restorative justice practices and give them their due diligence and their justice. So, but yeah, I'm not really even sure exactly what this video is about, but I do know that I've had an exchange with my students, and it just made me realize how important it is. We can say these catchphrases like cultural competency and inclusion and diversity, and like, for me, I understand and I have internalized what that means, but I've had to. When I moved to this country at a very young age, it was known very clearly, this is what you need to do to fit in and to survive, and this is what you're expected to do. Culturally, linguistically, educationally, like, I was put in my place very quickly, I feel. Now that we've hopefully progressed and have moved forward, we have a lot of people, and this is not a rant against white people, because I have a lot of, some of my closest friends are white, but they are also very aware of their own biases, their own prejudices, of their white guilt. We've had these conversations, and I think it's just important to know, like, just like I came to this country and had to assimilate and had to learn, I feel like it should be a requirement for teachers, particularly those who are not of whatever the predominant culture is, of the students that they're going to teach to learn. So like this year, for instance, you know, I'm Latina, but my students were predominantly African, not African American, African. And so I've learned so much, and I've, you know, at home done my own research and reading about their culture and their food and their languages and their school systems in Africa, because I wanted to connect. Now, I did that on my own time. That was not a part of my professional development. That was not a part of my end of year reflection or rating. And I think it should be. And I think in the end, that's kind of what the whole purpose of this video is like, we need to, as a society, think about the ways in which we as adults are communicating with, relating with the communities in which we teach. Now, if you happen to teach in a community that is yours and that you know very well, then okay, that's great. You know, then there's other ways to grow and develop as a professional. But I think it's time to start having the conversation like, no, if you are a white teacher going into a Black or Latino or Muslim or whatever community that is marginalized, like, you need to take the time to learn about them and to honor them and to be with them, you know. So yeah, and I don't know who needs to hear this today. I certainly needed to get it off my chest, and so that's what I did. Thank you for listening, and I am sure, you know, I can feel it. There are poems that are like coming to my mind as we speak, because I feel really strongly about this, and so I will share with those with you as they come up and as they are created. But I definitely wanted to share some thoughts. Have a good day.